Hello again, dear people, to a new edition of Reportercast for November 2022. My name is Matei Rosca, the reporter who owns the Reporter.London website, and my guest today is one of the few people who successfully took on dirty money in her country from a public office and won, though she did so at big personal cost. She had death threats and even a suspected attempt to assassinate her, or at least badly injure her here in London, where she moved, after she couldn't be safe any longer in her native Ukraine. She has closed down dozens of dirty banks and pointed out systemic failures in Ukraine and its financial system without fear. And that includes the largest bank in Ukraine at the time, which our guest nationalized. The bank is called Privat Bank, and its story is legendary, but it also has an ongoing litigation process in multiple jurisdictions. So we're going to have to be a bit careful how we talk about that. The former owners are known to be very litigious people. It should be clear by now, anyway, that the name of our special guest is Valeria Hontareva, the former central bank governor of Ukraine, and now a fellow on governance studies for the London School of Economics. Hello, Valeria, and thank you for joining our Reportercast.
Yeah, hello, and I'm happy to be there.
Thank you. Before I start with the questions, I would like to say thank you to our sponsors. H5 Strategies, a consulting firm in Bucharest specialized in Eastern Europe, Central Asia and Africa, and they advise politicians and business executives. Now, for the first question, Valeria, can you please say a little bit about your early days and what was life like before you became a central banker, and how did it happen that you took on the job of the head of the National Bank of Ukraine?
Yes, it's a long story because before joining central bank, I was a real professional banker. And but long time ago, I started to work like an engineer. But in the beginning of 90s, when we start all this process of Ukrainian independence, my first job was just a very, very small clerk in Ukrainian interbank currency exchange. It was the lowest possible position. But after 3 years, I was already the treasurer of Societe Generale in Ukraine. And after 5 years, I became head of capital markets with Societe Generale, it's subsidiary of Societe Generale Bank in Ukraine. And after I became a member of management board and deputy chairman. And in 2001, I switched also, not my profession, but I changed the bank and I became also head of financial markets and capital markets within ING Bank Ukraine. It's a subsidiary of ING Bank, and at that time I was also the first deputy chairman of ING Bank in Ukraine. And before I left ING Bank in 2007, I was already acting chairman of ING Bank in Ukraine, but I decided to do a little of a gamble, and together with my ING partners, we set up own business. And before I joined Central Bank, I was CEO and manager partner of Investment Capital Ukraine in Ukraine. It was the biggest asset manager and it was the biggest trader broker of securities and the biggest investment bank boutique. That's why I was a management partner responsible for asset management. It was my life before I joined Central Bank.
So that sounds like a very comfortable life. It sounds like you had a good standard of living, no major issues, and then why change all of this in order to take on probably the most difficult central banking job in the world at the time? Anyway?
Yeah, absolutely right. The same question my family ask me still now, even until now. And it was really, but I will tell you a little bit of history, because you think maybe that right now we have a war with Russia and Ukraine, but it's not the beginning of this war. Beginning of this war, it was in 2014. And exactly they annexed Crimea in the beginning of 2014 after revolution of dignity in Ukraine, when our former president Yanukovych left country. And it was such a mess in a country that to be even in business within a country in mess and in a country in war, believe me, it was not my dream. But in the same time, I was really very professional macroeconomist and very professional banker. And when new elected President Poroshenko gave me this proposal to be a governor of central bank, first of all, I refused. I said, no way, I'm a private business, I'm with my partners, and I'm ready to support our country, because it was, believe me, in Kiev, it was also after Revolution of Dignity, you can find some slides, it was also a situation like after the war. It was also a very difficult time in Ukraine. But I remember that third time after his proposal I accepted, because my family also supported me, because they said, if people like you will not help our country to survive, how Ukraine will exist? That's why my final call was, of course, very patriotic, and all my friends, frankly speaking, and all my colleagues, frankly speaking, that time, who joined not only central bank, but, for example, Minister of Finance, she was American citizen, Natalka Yareska. She was also head of very big private equity fund, American private equity fund, Horizon, and she joined like a Minister of Finance. And a lot of, I could recall right now, a lot of friends who did it only because of this patriotic appeal to do something for your country. And when I joined Central Bank in June 2014, I faced absolutely incredible perfect storm.
Right. Well, this would have been my second question. My third question, actually. You're the first woman to become the head of the central bank in Ukraine, in the history of Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first, and after me, right now we have number 3 new governor of central bank, still man. But yes, I am first, and for the time being, the last.
Right. And when you took the job at first, you already said you knew it was going to be difficult, but did you realize the scale of the challenges from the start? Did you take the job and did you start making changes from the first day, or how did it work?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought I realized all challenges, but believe me, when I joined Central Bank, Russia started a real war in our eastern part in Donbass. And that's why we lost not only 15% of our territory, because when I joined Central Bank, they already annexed Crimea. When we lost territory and we lost 2.5 million people and we lost 3% of our GDP, it was before even I joined Central Bank. But when I joined Central Bank in June, it was started the hot phase of war. It was really bloody war in our territory. And we lost 20% of our GDP, 15% of our territories, and 30% of export revenues, because Donbass part, which was occupied by Russia, was a real industrial part of our country. That's why from macroeconomic prospects, it was absolutely not expected by me. Of course, I knew about all collected disbalances, which was absolutely awful in all particular sphere of our economy. And in the same time, I knew about some banking sector really in a very bad condition. I knew about that. But what I after saw the reality, I was just shocked. But we started our reform from the first day. And of course, it could be very, very long story, and I will right now show you my book, Mission Possible.
Thank you. Yes.
It's the true story of Ukrainian comprehensive banking reform and practical manual for other nations. It's really, really very, very practical. I am a person absolutely zero bullshit person. That's why you can find a lot in this book, and it's in Amazon. That's why you can easily find it on Amazon.
We'll put a link to that book on the blog as well.
So it will book. I present it to you. That's why
I hope you signed it. If not, I'll make you sign it after we finish filming.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. And so then you restructured the internal organization of the central bank. You let go of many people there. You floated the currency, which a lot of people didn't like. And these were radical things you did. They were considered radical things anyway. And when you look back, Are you proud of these things, or do you think there was another way?
Yeah, I could tell you that I'm not just proud, I'm really, really proud of all of that. And moreover, if you ask right now Ukrainian bankers about our reforms, it was only one reason why our banks didn't fail during this phase of war. It was only reason why our banking system is really resilient, very well capitalized and very liquid, and our reserves, currency reserves, is really high to support exchange rate even till now, after 8 months of really bloody war. That's why I'm really proud of that. My book is started from my first meeting when I became governor of central bank. I went to Washington to annual meeting of IMF, and I asked especially meeting with Federal Reserve Deputy Stanley Fischer. Stanley Fischer, for me, he was a guru. You know, when I was a banker, for me, Stanley Fischer was like I never met him before, but like my personal guru, because he was not just macroeconomist, he also he was a governor of Central Bank of Israel during the wartime. And also he was a really, for me it was really like a very prominent person. And I asked, that's why my book started exactly the first page of my book from these words. And when I met Stanley Fischer and described him our problems, war in our territory, our budget didn't envisage any provisions for military expenses, all collected disbalances, absolutely ill banking system. And I count, and Mr. Fischer said, sorry, I could not help you, this mission impossible. And after this book called Mission Possible, because after 3 years we completed. I put my resignation letter because of death threats, but we completed all major reform. We switched to flexible exchange rate. We implemented new monetary policy of inflation targeting. Also, we clean up completely Ukrainian banking system and really enhanced its resilience for further. And also, we completely transformed central bank from medieval monster to modern central bank. That's why I'm really, really proud of that.
Fantastic. Well, in light of all of that, we have some leaders today and decision makers, including here in the UK, political crisis after political crisis, and it seems that people are afraid to make a decision. And I just wondered if you could give us a flavor of your reasoning and how you decide what to do when you're faced with a difficult choice, a radical situations. How do you get over difficulties as a manager?
Yeah, first of all, I propose to all political leaders to engage real professionals and real technocrats for all these reforms. Because because like political leader, all the time you create very good slogans, and try to appeal people, try to be populistic. But if you decided that you need to do some radical reforms, engage professional people. There are such people in this world, believe me, I know even such kind of people, not only in Ukraine, but around the globe. That's why, when you are a real technocrat, you start, and my book is about that, from what to start. What should you do first? You need a real exact plan, but first of all, you need to set up hierarchy of your priorities. But when we decided to do reforms, for us it was again some question what to do first. I arrived to the central bank. Former President Yanukovych, allies sitting around the table, all corrupted. I am alone, like one white knight. But again, when you start to do something, you start to think what to do, how to change people. For example, when I joined Central Bank, it was 12,000 people. When I left Central Bank, it was 5,000 people. And my further reduction of people should be to 2,000 only, because for such a country like Ukraine, 2,000 in supervisory and monetary policies, it's more than enough. I think at 2,000, it's exact size what we need to achieve. And you always should have your plan. For example, liberalization, initially we introduced absolutely draconic administrative measures because you need to stop panic. But after, we created a roadmap of liberalization of market. And it's how reformers work. There is some aims and the way from disastrous point A to rosy future point B. But it's step by step. It's very, very technical procedure how to do that. And it's written in my book how to do that.
Well, why don't we send a couple of copies of your book to the Palace of Westminster?
Believe me, we need for Palace of Westminster, we need right now NHS specialist, not NHS, healthcare specialist. I think it's a priority here. And real estate market specialist, it's not me, but I could help with
I have a question. I have a question about the economy in a second, but first of all, there's a personal question. You said when you first got requested to join the central bank, you said no.
Yes.
But then you said yes.
No, it was third attempt.
Third attempt.
Not only president.
Twice no, once yes.
Yes.
So how many times do I have to ask you now, on the record, if you're ever going to join Ukrainian politics?
Never ever, not just Ukrainian politics. Sorry, I'm very, very technocratic person, and sometimes for me it's very difficult even to hear what politicians are promised and how populistic they are. That's why it's absolutely not my cup of tea. It's not.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
This is the third time I'm asking you. Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure. About that, I'm sure.
Okay, well, let's leave it there then. And question now about the economy. Interest rates are going up around the world, more or less. Every central bank is increasing interest rates. The economy is slowing down. People are worried about house prices, mortgages. What do you think? Do you think we're headed for a financial crisis or what?
Unfortunately, yes. I think that the next stage of this turmoil will be financial crisis, unfortunately. But I could explain you what's happened. During last 15 years, we decided, not we, but politicians and unfortunately some central bankers as well, decided that they found panacea from all diseases. They cure all diseases using some printing money machine in a central bank. That's why right now balance sheet of all big international central banks, it's the highest level ever. I could not even tell you it's a tripled, their balance sheet tripled during last 10 years. And of course, when you ask me about, you remember a global financial crisis of 2008, it was quite good decision that time how to treat this crisis and how to manage that. But after, because everybody thinks that, oh my God, it's such a nice idea, we could inject money without any limits, it will be like, distribute money from helicopter for all people around the globe. And after we started to use this technology for everything. But unfortunately, all this money were real rocket fuel for assets prices. That's why it was incredible, price for some financial instruments in US and
what they call the everything bubble.
It was zero environment for pension funds. They try to do more risky operations. Banks start to do more risky operations only because zero rate environment will not allow them to earn anything. It was absolutely wrong that time. And after, of course, started COVID, and again, everybody decided that we will treat COVID just injecting new fresh money. And unfortunately, right now it's an energy crisis. But after, what we'd like to achieve in the energy crisis, we provide subsidies, we again printing money. In energy crisis, we need to create the right concept of energy. And after this right concept of energy, require right plan how to reach that.
So you need a supply of energy, not a supply of more
Of
money.
course, the same with real estate. Why I told that here we need exactly an HS specialist for a real estate specialist and energy specialist as well. Because for me, it's absolutely clear that good mix of green nuclear energy, but and hydrogen energy. It's only one solution. And if we use even printing money, our capital and time and resources productively, we will get everything what we need. But if we use unproductively like we did it before, we face the music right now with all this absolutely incredible inflation and these prices.
So is this crisis that's already beginning, is it inevitable or not?
Of course, we just face the music and reap the harvest what we, of all our mistakes during the last 10 years.
Okay, well that's a bit sad, isn't it?
No, but it's not time for us maybe to be frustrated. It's time for us to think how to act properly. How, because some people really afraid of world reform. They think that reform is something. No, reform it's about efficiency. Reform is just about efficiency.
It's an interesting thought. Now back to Ukraine and back to the period where you were closing down banks, because a lot of people don't know this history, and I think it's very important to look at what happened in Ukraine and in general in Eastern Europe before the invasion. There were a lot of dirty banks belonging to people who had links to oligarchs, organized crime, and ultimately Russia, Moscow, the Kremlin. Could you talk a little bit about this? Any cases in particular that you remember, that banks that you had to close, and what was happening there?
Maybe we will start from, we close completely 100 banks. It was a number of banks, it was like a 50% of our banking system, 55-0. It was absolutely incredible, but it's only because it was not bank. There are no banks. It was money laundering machine. Also, it was so-called zombie banks, and I will elaborate a little more about what does it mean, zombie banks. It was oligarch banking model, and after it was some foreign banks, like Raiffeisen, ING, a good one, of course, and after it was 15% of Russian state banks in our banking system was 15% of our market share was 15% of Russian state bank. Believe me, state banks when the country in a war with this particular state. And also it was about 30% of state banks, Ukrainian state banks, Ukredexim Bank and Ashadny, like a saving bank. In Ukrainian it's Ashadny Bank. But believe me, this bank were in an awful condition, because all political elites used this bank like their own wallet. It means that oligarchs use their banks like their own printing money machine, but state elite use state banks for the same reason.
Two parallel issues. One, money laundering. Two, giving out loans that were never going to be paid back.
Yes, it's oligarch banking. Third, it's state banks when state recapitalized this bank all the time and provided all the time money to some people, with link to governmental position. It's corruption. It's a 100% corruption, and that's why And zombie bank, it's a bank with no assets at all, just with liabilities. For some and money laundering machine, of course, as well, and oligarch banking, as you mentioned, absolutely, they only gather money from all possible sources, including Eurobonds, central bank refinancing, whatever source, some international financing, and after provided all this money to his main shareholders, and never supposed to be repaid.
Right.
And if you ask me about, of course, the biggest fraud was private bank. And because it was systemically important bank, and the market share of this bank at that time was 30%. 30% in private individual deposits. Could you imagine there is nothing such in the history of the world when 30% of private individual deposits of one particular country stay in a private bank? Because in Russia, for example, all biggest retail bank is Russian saving bank, Russian own, publicly owned, or not publicly but state owned. In China, it's also the biggest bank and state owned. In America, the biggest retail banks are publicly owned. That's why when such monster appear in our territory, and when I ask all my colleagues around the globe, please help me, we should do something with that, how to do that. And I'm very, very appreciate that IMF and World Bank and US Treasury helped me a lot with this project.
Right. But just to be clear, there was what, 5 billion missing from private bank.
Yeah, $5.5 billion. But again, for example, if you compare with Ponzi scheme of Madoff in the US, you think 5.5 billion here and 60 billion there. Why you think that it's the biggest one? But you need to compare the magnitude of fraud with the GDP of your country.
Of course.
It was 40% of our monetary supply. For a central banker, it's clear what I'm talking about.
No, it's huge. But I'm going to ask you a slightly political one now. We know that before fully invading in February, Putin had spent a lot of money trying to infiltrate Ukraine. And I wonder, do you think Russia wanted to use the banking system of Ukraine to make Ukraine weaker in order to make it more invadable?
I could tell you no. And I could explain you why. Because in 2014 we was not sitting silently. We immediately, first of all, introduced a lot of different type of conditions for Russian state banks. And after we asked Russian state banks to do some debt to equity swap, just recapitalize their bank through their loans from mother's banks. It means that they have very limited room for maneuver. We monitor them especially. That's why. And finally, when I left, these banks were already eliminated. It's not anymore in the market. First was VTB, second was WEB, a subsidiary Prominvest, and the third recently was closed completely. It's a saving bank in Ukraine. But believe me, in 2014, 2015, we introduced such draconic measures against these banks that it was not a risky for Ukraine anymore.
But not only the state banks, but also privately held banks that were engaged in organized crime, money laundering.
Yeah, but we clean up Ukrainian banking system. What I told you, it was a very difficult exercise. But starting in 2015, first of all, we did asset quality review after stress test, and after we start recapitalization of banking system, and anyone who didn't deliver their promises, not recapitalize bank properly, will get out from market. That's why we closed 100 banks, and one of them really was too big to fail. Private bank was nationalized. That's why Ukrainian banking system was clear, very good capitalized, transparent. Because first of all, we introduced very strict rule against beneficiary owners. Because it's a still problem in some European banks, but in my book is written how to do all this exercise with related lending and with beneficiary owners recognition. That's why it's a complex reform, and we need it.
But so is it fair to say that having these dirty banks in Ukraine made Ukraine weaker, and it was necessary to improve the whole economy and the whole society?
Yeah, but it was cleaned up in 2015. That's why after that it was a really good success story in Ukraine and very, very good control, because we did all our reforms in parallel. It was also main idea for all reformers to understand how to do that, because when we are talking about exchange rate, or we are talking about monetary policy, it's a macro frame. When we are talking about banking sector, it's a banking supervision. But when we are talking about central bank itself, it should have the capacity to do that. If you if you didn't change the central bank procedures, committees,
Yes,
how you will do proper supervision?
But mostly I'm referring to what was happening before you came in.
Yeah, but it was awful. My book is really started from this point when I saw Ukrainian banking sector in details, because in the central bank everything is more visible, because when you're outside of central bank, you could only consider official statements. But if, for example, PricewaterhouseCoopers, they confirm this 5 years in a row, or maybe even more, they confirm the financial statements of private bank. It's the biggest fraud in the history of this world, financial history, but they confirm. Of course, each time they wrote a disclaimer that we do not responsible for anything because management provided us this information. But sorry guys, you are auditors. You should be responsible to identify fraud.
Yes. And what is, just so people understand, because not everybody is an expert in this, what is the effect on society when you have monster banks like this?
In fact, you could have right now we nationalize this bank, and this bank is really the most profitable one in our country. But it's a state-owned bank, and that's why tomorrow, of course, we need to consider how not to concentrate all assets in the state hands, because we'd like to build capitalism, not socialism, back again. But again, it will be some challenge for this bank after the wartime. It will be IPO, I suppose, of this bank, or maybe it will be some strategic sale. But for why we nationalize this bank, but not, send this bank to deposit fund for liquidation, it's only because it was not just 30% of private individual deposits, it was also 50% of business and monetary transactions in a country. It's really very big retail bank. That's why for our population we save their money. Of course, state paid for that 5.5 billion, but for population we save their money. Right. And we save country from lockdown. If this bank will be liquidated, it will be just lockdown for people, because it was 20 million credit cards in their pockets. If one day they recognize that they have no even their money and cards. Yeah,
and the owners of Privat, when the war started, they financed the fight against Russia. They financed even the now famous Azov battalion, didn't they? No?
It's a fairy tale of 2014, because if you remember, in 2014 he's under American sanctions maybe last 2 years. Someone told you a story of 2014 when he'd like to be a governor of Dnipropetrovsk region, and he supported something through his business initially, just to gather all assets of this region. If you consider what the board when war started, it was it was in the middle of Donetsk region. After Donetsk region there is Zaporizhia, and after that only Dnipropetrovsk region. That's why it's a fairy tale which distributed by Mr. Kolomoisky.
Right, and also before that, Privat, and especially the Latvian unit of Privat, was doing a whole lot of business with Russia, a whole lot of business with Kremlin.
Yeah, of course, it's a money laundering machine in Latvia, no doubt about that.
And apart from Privat, there were also other banks that were doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely, it was my first call. It's even written in this book, because it was my first call. When I became a governor of central bank, I asked in Washington, I asked governors of 3 regions to meet with me and discuss these problems. Because when you have money laundering machine in your country, but how they do that? They initiated money laundering process, yes. But facilitators of all this process, of course, it's European banks, because it means money laundering when you withdraw money from Ukraine through different corrupted schemes and try to transfer this money abroad. You use some foreign banks, and especially it was Latvian banks. And Cyprus was a long story, but after the crisis of 2008, when their banking sector collapsed, you remember maybe all this story, Cyprus was quite cooperative and never stopped to do all these dirty operations. But that time it was Latvia. Latvia was top one, and second one was Austria. And I asked governors of these banks to immediately to meet with me. I show all of them, and for example, in Austria it was minor bank, and in Latvia it was not just a subsidiary of private bank. It was different type of banks. But you know, the governor of Latvia and head of supervision of Latvia right now on the investigation. Criminal. That's why how they could react it for my call.
So you had a call with this man.
Of course, I met them all 3 years. Each year when I was in Washington and all this, I always ask Latvian central banking to meet with me because to discuss how they could help us with clean up of all this mess.
And were they helpful?
No.
Right. Well, that's interesting.
But right now they're under investigation themselves. That's why I could answer even why they didn't help us. Before, I think maybe they're not brave to do that. Right now, I understand that they were somehow involved, maybe.
Potentially. And well, before my next question, I would like to say again thank you to our sponsors at H5 Strategies in Bucharest, a political and executive consulting firm specialized in Eastern Europe, Africa and Central Asia, and it's also worth mentioning the sponsors are not involved in the interviews or the content, the journalistic content. They give us our independence completely, and we thank them for this. And that said, another question would be about the threats, of course. Yes, you had threats, harassment, hate mail. And ultimately, even after you moved to London, you had an attempt on your life. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, please? If it's not too painful.
No, it's not because of too painful. I could not speculate about London attack because it was not proof that it was someone special.
But what happened exactly?
Yeah, it was some car accident in a road. But what's happened after, it was really very interesting. Because when I stay in a hospital in very bad condition, in Ukraine they blew up the car of my son. Next week they intruded to my Kiev's apartment. It was 10 people in masks and with machine guns. And after additional week, they really arson my house to ash.
They burned down your house?
Yes, they burned my house to ash. You can find, or I could send you some even video from all this awful, because it was in all newspapers around the globe. It was attacked, really very awful attack. But after they also tried some persecution, political, and even in London, one oligarch launched some claim against me because during the privatization process, it was we bailed in some related parties' money to decrease capital whole. Mm-hmm. And one of these oligarchs, of course, he was sponsored by Kolomoisky for all his legal expenses here in London, no doubt about that. He even launched some claim against me for $250 million. And of course I won everything. He didn't even appeal to this because it was, for them, it was like humiliation. But it was especially done to destroy my life, because even if you win the court case, you obliged to pay all these fees, because it's very expensive here to pay all these solicitor, barrister. It's a very, very special system. And after the court reimbursed me only 80%, means that 20% is still lost. For me, it's a very big money. When for these oligarchs, it's just the peanuts from their billions. That's
Okay.
why they try to destroy my life. Even now, last year I won
Just
this
to be
court
sure,
case.
just to be clear, there was never a proper investigation into the attempts.
In London, it was some investigation, but they didn't tell that something suspicious was in this particular case. But everything in chain was really, really very suspicious.
Yes, but there was no one officially pointing the finger at anyone.
They opened the case, but after they said that they didn't find any linkage with Russian or Ukrainian. But who knows? Right now, internet work for some killers better than official investigations.
Good Lord.
Yes, but I do not want to speculate for that. I
Yeah,
could
let's
only
not,
count
just because we
all
don't
other
know.
problems which already happened with me and daily, the threats which I got in Ukraine, and absolutely incredible slander campaign against me, against my family. It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Can I bring you to the topic of the war now, the current war, since the invasion, since the re-invasion of February? Could you talk a little bit about how the financial support of the foreign partners of Ukraine should be organized? There's a lot of debate today about reparations, reconstruction. How should that be done, do you think? What's your view on that?
Yeah, first of all, from the first minute of this war, I started to write to all my contacts around the globe sanctions proposal, and I'm very happy that a lot of my proposals already implemented. And second one, I volunteered to do business support program for Ukraine, and I did it together with 10 other participants, and that's why it was also my help to Ukraine during the wartime. And right now, of course, I'm very actively participate in all this preparation to so-called Marshall Plan, because we need, of course, very good organized plan for Ukrainian reconstruction and recovery. And of course, sometimes Ukraine requires such a big amount of money for their reconstruction and recovery that sometimes it's not even, in line with possibility of all international financial organization. And you know that it was your question before. Right now, central banks start to little bit. Tighten their monetary policy. It's not the time to cure all disease using money printing machine. That's why for Ukraine it will be quite difficult. But again, the main idea to have a right plan and right strategy what to do. Because if when hot stage of war stopped, I think we need immediately to start this recovery. Even right now, in parallel, we need to recover some very crucial infrastructure, because Russia, for example, they bombing daily our electricity grids, and we need to do that even right now. That's why, of course, all this big Marshall Plan, it should be stages right now, stage even during the hot phase of war, and after, of course, the more intensive rebuilding and recovery after the end of war. Because I'm worried about how this war will be ended when we really recall to official start of Marshall Plan. Because it's very difficult. Putin will never sign off any capitulation agreement. Ukraine will never put their flag to Kremlin. That's why we need to find some very, very normal solution for and good signal for international markets that hot phase of war is somehow stopped.
Of course.
And we need to start our recovery. It's very, very important from technical point of view, because otherwise, any investments in a country in war never even covered by insurance. Right now, even yesterday, I had a meeting when we discuss again war insurance products. Because right now only one multinational organization, multilateral, so-called MIGA, it's a part of World Bank, they could issue some war protection. Because all other, for example, expert credit agencies like Hermes or Kafaz, they could do some very limited protection from war. But we need, of course, to give some confidence to investors and to private sectors that it will be not destroyed tomorrow. It's a main idea. And of course, what kind of money we should use for this absolutely incredible amount what we need for Russian for Ukrainian reconstruction? It's Russian money. No doubt that it's already frozen $300 billion. And I truly believe that even 50% of that should go to Ukraine directly, through fund, of course, with very good procedure of monitoring how they use this money, no doubt about that. But maybe other 50% of this could go to G7 to cover their expenses, because right now they support Ukraine for $80 billion, 80. My financial support was 20, but military support, humanitarian support of our refugees, total amount of 80 billion. And part of that should go directly to companies which suffer their business and left Russian market. And this company with war protection, with war insurance, should start to do real recovery of
inside Ukraine.
Inside Ukraine. It will be win-win situation, I think. And that's why we not just grab all this money just for Ukraine, but it's better to distribute them properly and after to attract them like a private investment to our country. It's my personal view.
No, that's very interesting. And this, just to be clear, so people have the background. Russia had what, 400 billion in foreign reserves.
300 it was already frozen. Yes, but frozen, not confiscated. We need to.
So reserves with other central banks in the world.
Yes, it's a central bank reserve.
That the Central Bank of Russia was keeping in other central banks in New York, London, and so forth. And when Russia sent its tanks over the border, these reserves were frozen.
Yes, it's frozen. It's still frozen.
But they haven't been taken away from Russia.
No, it's not yet confiscated.
It's been frozen.
Just frozen.
But now the debate is that, you have war crimes happening daily. It's clear the Russians, from the top of the army, from the top of the Kremlin, have a strategy to commit war crimes in Ukraine. They order missiles shot into civilian areas, ballistic missiles.
Yes,
shot into energy.
Terrorist, country aggressor, country terrorist. That's why it's very easy to confiscate right now all these frozen reserves in the favor of Ukraine and other.
So based on this,
G7.
this could be a legal basis to take this money and give it to Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it's a clear legal basis for that. For oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, it's more difficult situation because you need to prove that they somehow finance terrorism. But for Russian Federation, it's easier.
For the central bank reserves,
yes,
strictly.
Yes.
Okay, and now
that's why we already found 300 billions. Yeah.
Speaking of the Russian central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, I think you know her personally.
Yes, I know her.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you knew her? And do you think now, given her role in the regime today, do you think she should be under international sanctions?
Yeah, she already under international sanctions. She already under sanctions. The first sanctions
from
were Canada. After it was US and UK as well. She's under.
Oh, she's under UK sanctions as well.
All under all sanctions. Unfortunately, of course, better late than never. But it was happened only recently. During the first day of the war, when I mentioned that I know Elvira Nabiullina, she is a really good professional banker. And in 2015, she was recognized the best banker in the world, believe me, central banker. And she, from professional point of view, it's absolutely right. But my recommendation to Elvira Nabiullina that day was fixed whatever you need to fix for urgent administrative measures. It was concrete for central banking. I will not bother our audience with all this stuff. But after I said, fix it and put your resignation letter. Put your resignation letter and not participate in this absolutely awful war. It's humiliation of all civilized society. And otherwise, if you will not do that, you will be the same criminal like Putin, because you will support Putin's war regime. Unfortunately, she didn't do that. Someone said that she tried to do that. But again, I could tell you how I resigned from central bank. I put my resignation letter to president, and after it was a press conference when I said that, guys, I give you one month to provide official resignation, because official resignation should be done only in the parliament, according to Ukrainian constitution. And after I said, I will stay with you 1 month and I'm waiting for this resignation. If not, I will not appear in a central bank, no 1 day. And after 1 month, I signed my first deputy like acting governor and left central bank. I was officially resigned only in 11 months. That's why if there is a will, there is a way. And that's why it's my call for Nabiulina. If you really like to do that, you could find how to do that.
Right. And when was your last conversation with her?
Before I resigned in 2017, I suppose it was in Washington during this annual meeting. Yeah.
This is the end of our podcast episode for November, and huge thanks to Mrs. Hontareva for taking the time from her busy schedule and speaking with us. And final thanks to H5 Strategies in Bucharest, executive and political consultancy specialized in Eastern Europe, Africa and Central Asia. And thanks to everyone in the audience as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
All right.